Oh, hello there. Eddie Mercado here with BloodyElbow.com, and welcome to the 6th Round Retro. The date is January 24th, 2009. The event, Affliction number 2, the Day of Reckoning. This was Fedor Emelianenko versus Andrei Arlovski for the WAMA heavyweight title. And this was the follow-up event to Affliction Band, which happened 7 months before this event here. The venue, the Honda Center in Anaheim, California. My co-host for today, none other than legendary combat sports journalist Fraser Coffeen. Fraser, how are you, sir?
I am good. How are you, Eddie? I appreciate the legendary. That's very kind of you. What a generous man.
Yes, sir. I'm well, man. I'm excited to talk about this card. Arlovski and Fedor fought. It's so easy to forget that this happened, but it's once you remember, it's like, oh yeah, it really did happen. It was wild. But so the follow-up event, Affliction Day of Reckoning, there were quite a few changes from the first show we saw. Now, I guess the second show wasn't quite as successful in terms of money. It did 10,000 less pay-per-view buys. It did $500,000 less at the live gate. There was no Megadeth. The prelims were on HDNet instead of Fox Sports Net, which was HDNet's Mark Cuban's network. And he was actually really big into MMA and was doing big things for the sport at the time. He had like weekly fight shows and a bunch of live MMA events streaming on his channel, which was super cool. So good on him for capitalizing on the MMA boom. The commentators changed up a bit. They got rid of Jay Glazer and Frank Trigg and John McCarthy and brought in Sean Wheelock, Jimmy Smith, and Tito Ortiz. And that's interesting because Jimmy Smith was just replaced at Bellator by John McCarthy. Jimmy Smith now going over to the UFC. So that's kind of weird how they switched there. And now, 9 years later, the reverse switch is going on. So that's pretty crazy.
Yeah, it's the other thing, the other switch that I think is interesting in here too. You can tell that clearly some businessman at Affliction was like, all right, we ate way too many losses on that first show because let's dial back a lot of our expenses. And one of those expenses they dial back is eliminating Michael Buffer, which seems like a wise move because he's expensive. And they replace him with Michael Williams. So on this show, you've got Wheelock and Jimmy Smith and Michael Williams, which I, and I'm sure many others, think of as the quintessential Bellator team. And this, from the way that they're talking to each other, it sounds like this is the first time that Smith and Wheelock are working together, is on this particular show. There's a couple points where you get that vibe, which is kind of cool to hear, to be like, oh, it's Team Bellator out here doing their thing. It's kind of awesome.
Yeah, I definitely enjoy it. And I don't even remember them being there too. Like, because I ordered this pay-per-view back in the day, and I didn't know who they were or what was going on. I'm just like, oh, they got different people out here. John McCarthy's not here anymore. I really paid no mind to it at the time. But man, Jimmy Smith is really a fantastic commentator. He really is, and I'm glad to see that he got picked up by the UFC. That's pretty huge.
I'm totally thrilled. I agree more. He's great. He's going to be a great addition to the UFC for sure.
So the backstage interviews, they brought in Chuck Zito and Scott Farrell, if I said his name right. And this is like the biggest odd couple in the world. You got one guy who's underwhelming, doesn't really get his words out, doesn't have too much to say. And then you got the other guy in Scott who's over the top, this kind of radio disc jockey voice, and he's always talking over Zito, and it's just this weird how in the world did these guys get that gig? It was so odd to see him double team in interviews, and it was weird. It was definitely weird.
Yeah, it's a mess. The backstage stuff is a total mess. They have no concept of how much time they have, so they try to ask 5 questions to guys in the 1 minute between rounds that they have to talk, and they inevitably go into the next round. It's a whole big mess back there, but an entertaining mess.
Yeah, definitely entertaining mess. I just remember like they interviewed Freddie Roach, and I'm just like, man, like how did these guys get the chance to interview Freddie Roach? And Zito, I think his question was, so what do you think about the boxing with Fedor, the boxing? And I'm like, that's your question? Like, are you kidding me? Like,
that's it. You got your moment with Freddie. That's what you're asking. You're going for it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, there were it was different. No Megadeth, no Michael Buffer, like you said. Donald Trump, I think, had a more active role in this particular show. And of course, Trump went on to become POTUS, President of the United States. And I believe Fraser just put out an awesome article detailing how Trump had political ties to Russia, even way back then in 2009.
I wouldn't go so far as to say political, because I don't want to get because I don't want to find myself all of a sudden being investigated by the FBI.
Allegedly.
Yeah, right. But certainly on this show, one of the sponsors is Trump. One of the sponsors is M1 Global, and the majority shareholder of M1 Global, who appears on this particular show, is a gentleman named Sergei Matvienko, whose mother at the time was the mayor of St. Petersburg and one of Putin's closest allies. So it's just interesting, thinking of all the discussion that's going on today. It's just interesting to see those two people, one Trump, one someone who has very close ties, 2 degrees away from being very close to Putin. They're working together. My other thing that I love about Trump's involvement here that I think is hilarious is that for this particular show, they've written on the mat in each one of the 4 corners, and they've written it in the ridiculous Affliction font. So you get this the Affliction font, and there it is, like Trump, like all over the mat. It's pretty silly.
Yeah, silly's the right word for it, for sure.
Yeah.
And crazy connection though. Definitely cool to look back and see Trump with some sort of Russian ties in some sort of way, But man, so the main event was such a huge main event. You got Arlovski, who, by the way, I think he banked like $1.5 million for this fight, which is like unheard of. Like the paychecks that Affliction was giving out was like astronomical. Like even Ben Rothwell was like banking like $250K in Affliction, and he wasn't even anybody of any note at this point in time. So like, Affliction was really kind of, putting the fighter pay scale on the map and making people like blatantly saying, this is what we're paying our people. What about you, UFC? Show your hand. And that's big for back then in 2009, especially like, because today free agency is like one of the #1 topics in the sport. And so back then you had this promotion kind of forcing the hand of the UFC, which I thought was interesting and ballsy.
It is. And yeah, you're right. They paid a lot. Paul Buentello got $90,000. Paul Buentello, $90,000. I mean, they're handing it out, which no complaints from me. The more money we can put into fighters' hands, the better. They deserve every single penny they can get pulled their way. So kudos to him for that. And kudos to Arlovski for getting a giant payday for this.
Yeah, good for him. Probably his biggest payday to date. But so Fedor Emelianenko in the main event defeats Andrei Arlovski by brutal knockout, 3 minutes and 14 seconds into round 1. This was for the World Association of Mixed Martial Arts heavyweight title. Fedor comes into this and on the heels of destroying Tim Sylvia in 36 seconds, which, by the way, the best part about that fight is how short it is. It was so short that they replayed it on the broadcast. Like it's great. You can watch the entire thing in just seconds. And he proved he's the baddest man on the planet. So this was him proving it again. You got Arlovski, who, he beat the brakes off of Ben Rothwell. Granted, no one really knew who Rothwell was, but he was still a big, tough dude. And, Arlovski really did his thing. He knocked out Roy Nelson in Elite XC, which is tough. Like, who's knocking out Roy Nelson? Even today, like that's one of the hardest things in the world. It's probably knocking out Roy Nelson. And Another interesting thing is on the broadcast, like I said, they interviewed Freddie Roach, who is Arlovski's boxing coach at the time. And Roach says that after the Fedor fight, Arlovski's going to go off and compete for the heavyweight boxing championship of the world. And it's like, what? Like, way ahead of its time. You know, you got Conor going to fight Floyd nowadays. Like, this was back in 2009. You got Arlovski talking about competing professionally in boxing. So, you know, that was delusions of grandeur, I would say, but, you know, kind of cool to hear that.
Yeah, I mean, it is cool. And you're right, it is a little bit, you know, as we see in this fight, it's a little bit premature, clearly. But, you know, I said when we talked about the Rothwell fight on the first Affliction show, I said that to me, this is sort of peak Arlovski, and I stick by that. That the win over Rothwell is amazing. He looks so dominant there. You're right. The stopping Roy Nelson is great. And then he comes in here, and you're right. The fight is what was the time again? 3 minutes and 14 seconds. So he's got about 3 minutes and 12 seconds where he looks really, really good against Fedor Emelianenko. But he does not make it all the way to 3:14 looking good.
Yeah, it's so unfortunate too, because, you know, I'm a huge Fedor fan, and I will be honest, at this point in time, there was a part of me that wanted to see Arlovski do it. You know, there was a part of me, like, he won me over in the UFC. You know, like, he had his whole vampire shtick, and he had the fangs in the mouthpiece. Like, I was a fan. Like, he was a savage, like this built fucking, like, just behemoth who was down to bang, trying to knock people out. And I love that. And I really thought that if anyone was going to do it, it was going to be Arlovski. And, you know, he comes out, Arlovski's mixing up his leg kicks and his punches, and he's tagging Fedor, and he's obviously has the speed advantage, and he's coming with the straight punches, you know, mixing up punches to the body, punches to the head. He backs Fedor up into the corner, and for some reason decides, hey, forget what's been working. I don't need these technical punches and strike. Like, let me go and throw a flying knee recklessly at one of the hardest hitters of all time. And he got what he deserved. I hate to say, but he got clipped with a hellacious right hand in midair and falls to the canvas face first and does the face plant. And his face bounces off the canvas. I think his eyes might have been still open too. Like, this was a scary, scary knockout. And he went from winning the fight. He was winning, lost. It sucks for Arlovski, you know.
It does, but man, is it an incredible moment. Like you said, midair. He's in the air when Fedor just like a missile, like, just finds him right on the chin, knocks him unconscious while he's in the air. He's unconscious before he hits the mat. It's very clear from his body language and from the fact that he flops on the mat horribly. Like, he's knocked out in midair. You're right. He's lying on the mat face down. He's planking basically, with his eyes open. And you know, it also led to an easy to find picture if you go hunt online. One of the all-time great MMA photos of him unconscious there on the mat while the ref looks over him, and Fedor, just cool Fedor style, just walking away from the destruction he's wrought. It really is an amazing moment. I think one of your all-time great KOs in the sport. It's an incredible moment that just says, my God, this guy is so good. You make one mistake against this dude and you're nuked. You have to fight the absolutely perfect fight, the best fight you've ever fought. Then you give him any opening, he kills you. And that's exactly what Arlovski did here.
Man, it was so crazy, and it just only added to the mystique of Fedor. It was like, you could be fighting the perfect fight, and the next thing you know, you've already lost before you even know what happened. And, like, that's so tough to deal with, and that's why so many people were afraid to fight Fedor before they even fought him. It's because, like, he's this mythical creature. Like, he's not even human at this point. Like, he has surpassed any kind of logical explanation for just completely. There's no bounds here. Like, he's morphed into just this entity of all things MMA. Like, any hardcore head will tell you who's the best fighter on the planet, hands down, no questions asked. It's Fedor Emelianenko. But I will say this: in my personal opinion, this was the first time we saw Fedor past his prime. Tim Sylvia, prime. Arlovski, just over the hump. But he still had enough to get it done. But, man, it was like the beginning of the slump, so to speak.
I buy that. I can see what you're saying there. I mean, Arlovski definitely gets some things off. And then, you know, we're not far from the end of the road for Fedor here. So after the Arlovski fight, the next up for Fedor was the Brett Rogers fight, where Brett Rogers, it's not like he did great, but he did land, you know, some shots. And Brett Rogers is not a very good fighter. So for him to land some shots is an accomplishment in and of itself. And then the one after that is the famous loss to Verdum. So, you know, this is the second to last fight in Fedor's undefeated streak. So yeah, I see what you're saying. If this is either the first one on, I'm with you. I think I'll back that as well. This is the very beginning of something going downhill just a little bit, not much,
just there, just over the nook, like. It's like he's on a roller coaster and he can now see the dip, and it's like, oh shit. I feel like, you know, I haven't watched the Brett Rogers fight in a while, but for some reason I feel like he had to come back in that fight to win it.
He did. Yeah, it's way more than you should against Brett Rogers.
Yeah. So then after the Brett Rogers fights, like you said, he lost to Verdum, and then he gets knocked out by Bigfoot, and then he gets knocked out by Hendo. And then he wins like 5 straight over in Japan and Russia. And then for whatever reason, signed with Bellator. And he lost. He got knocked out by Matt Mitrione recently, which was actually close to being a double knockout. But unfortunately, Matt Mitrione had to ruin it for everybody by waking up. So
it would have been an amazing moment. And now, of course, he's in the Bellator Heavyweight Grand Prix. He's got Frank Mir coming up in March, April, something like that.
It's somewhere like that. Which, somewhere, you know, there. I'm upset that he's in the tournament, but I'm glad he's fighting Frank Mir. That's a fight I want.
That fight's awesome. Frank Mir versus Fedor is awesome. It's tremendous. I have to admit, while I was watching this show and thinking about that tournament, there was this part of me. I know that it's not going to happen. I know that I'm only going to end in tears. But there was this part of me that was like, oh man, what if Fedor wins that tournament? That'd be the greatest thing ever. What if somehow he doesn't? He's not going to. Let's be clear. He's not going to. But I think he might beat Frank Mir. I think he could beat Mir. It'll be interesting to see.
He could definitely beat. I think that's fair. He can beat Frank Mir. And I mean, he almost knocked out Matt Mitrione. So, you know, there could be an argument that he could knock out Matt Mitrione. And Matt Mitrione might be favored to win the whole thing. So, you know, he could win the tournament. But, man, I just don't want to see Fedor fighting people in their prime. You know, I want to see Fedor fight fellow people who are slightly past their prime. What is Dan Henderson
like Frank Mir. That's why it's perfect.
Like Frank Mir. I'm totally okay with that. That's good business. Yeah. Arlovski, on the other hand, this marked the beginning of a 4-fight losing skid, and 3 of those were by knockout. Big time sad face for Arlovski, but he did bounce back and make his way to the UFC and put up a nice winning streak, followed by a abysmal losing streak, but actually won his last fight back in November and currently the number 12 heavyweight in the entire world, which is nuts and bonkers, and has a fight coming up with Stefan Struve on in March at UFC 222. So heavyweight is one of those where the guys just seem to fight forever. There's no shelf life at heavyweight.
Yeah. And again, bizarrely, you're right. It's bizarre that he's number 12. And bizarrely, that's a winnable fight for him, Stefan Struve. It is not beyond the realm of possibility that Arlovski wins that fight. So who knows how long he's going to be.
I'll definitely be rooting for him. That's for sure. It's rare that I root against Arlovski.
No, you've got to root for Arlovski. No offense to Struve. I like Struve, but it's Andrei Arlovski. You root for him whenever you can. Yeah,
absolutely. So our co-main event of the evening, we have Josh Barnett, the former UFC heavyweight champion, defeated Gilbert Yvel by submission due to strikes, not from a hold, at 3 minutes and 5 seconds of the 3rd round, I believe.
Yep.
And so Barnett comes in off of that insane knockout of Pedro Rizzo in the previous Affliction show. Ivel, on the other hand, I think he tried to get on the first Affliction show, but like he couldn't get cleared because he was like banned from fighting in the U.S., I think. So this match is the battle of the banned fighters. You know, like each of these guys had to do a stint outside of the United States of America just because of their track records, for different reasons. Ivel, somewhat known as a dirty fighter, and Barnett just can't pass a piss test to save his life. So, different reasons, but both, outlaws, so to speak, at the sport. And, Gilbert just really had nothing for the ground game of Barnett. Big shocker there. And ultimately tapped the strikes in the third. He was mounted pretty much the entire fight and just, typical Josh Barnett, having an extreme edge in one specific area and capitalizing on it fully. Technical clinic by Barnett. And, you got any thoughts other than that from this one?
No, I mean, the first Affliction show when it was Barnett and Hizzo, Barnett clearly went out there with something to prove. He wanted to show off his striking. He wanted to show that he was the superior striker to Pedro Hizzo, and so he intentionally kept it on his feet. Here, he has no such desire to do that. He knows that he just owns Gilbert Ivel on the mat 100%, and so he just does that. He just goes in there and says, "Nah, I'm just going to take the easy route, like the safer route." Easy is not the right word, the safer, more strategic route, and just drown him in the area where he's not prepared. So it is it's a little lackluster because it just takes him a while to get it done. And it doesn't have, sometimes Barnett on the mat can be doing some really cool, funky, sort of interesting stuff. He's not really busting out a lot of interesting stuff here. So it ends up being a little bit of a dud. Just because it's so dominant. But this is a good place to point out, interestingly, I feel like, since we just talked about Arlovski and now we're talking about Barnett, probably a good place to point out here that Arlovski and Barnett was originally supposed to be the headlining fight for this show. When it was scheduled for October of the previous year, the original plan for Affliction 2 was going to be Arlovski versus Barnett in October. And then they decided that no Fedor would mean no buys, and therefore they did not want to run a Fedor-less show, and so they postponed it. But that's a real shame because I think Barnett and Arlovski happening at this time would have been a killer fight back at this point. It would have been awesome.
Yeah, it would have robbed us of Fedor Arlovski. That was just epic. But yes, Barnett and Arlovski just kind of has this old school UFC feel to it. Like this fight could have happened in the UFC way back when. And I would have loved. It's intriguing as fuck. Specifically, the grappling. Like, what would happen when they finally clinched? Like, if Barnett and Arlovski clinched up, would there be takedown? Like, that's interesting. And going back to the Fedor Arlovski fight, there was a moment where, Fedor finally closed the distance, and Arlovski locks up with him, and he went for the takedown, and I'm like, oh, here it is. Like this is something like I always wanted to see. Like what would happen if, you got the Sambo god in Fedor, and then got Arlovski, who, you couldn't mention Arlovski at this point without tagging him in with Sambo in some way. So, what was going to happen when you got these two Sambo guys linking up? And ultimately nothing. It was kind of, they stalemated each other, and it ended up in a referee separation. But at least I got to see that. So that was a cool little moment in that Arlovski fight. Okay, so Barnett here. So, he runs through Ivel, and then afterwards, let's also mention those little protein shake things with the little twist top. Like, whatever company it was, that was like a huge thing at the time. Every single fighter had this weird shaker bottle full of some powder or something that he was drinking, and you're wondering why guys are failing piss tests, and it was a funny little moment. But so Barnett, he goes on to get booked against Fedor in what was supposed to be the third event for Affliction. It was going to be called Affliction Trilogy. However, our boy failed a piss test, and days before he was supposed to fight Fedor, I guess the results came out. The fight was canceled. They weren't able to rebook someone in short notice against Fedor, and the whole event was canceled. Thus, the whole promotion tanked. Was Barnett the fall guy? Was it all Barnett's fault here? Some say yes. Barnett says, there was a lot more going on behind the scenes. It wasn't just me. I guess we'll never really know, but that was definitely the end of Affliction.
Yeah, I mean, it's, Barnett causing the main event to be canceled and thus them to cancel the show certainly does not look good on Barnett. But by the same token, if you're in such a position as a company that when one dude drops out of your card, your entire promotion shuts down, it's not entirely that dude's fault at that point. That's a problem.
Unfortunately, at this point in time, there's a lot of promotions that kind of died off of one fight. We saw that with was that Elite XC when the whole Kimbo Slice Seth Petrozelli thing took place. Ken Shamrock pulled out. Well, I guess that's kind of that's a good learning moment. Where let's say you tried to replace someone at the last second. You have this main event. One of your main event guys pulls out. You need a short notice replacement. You bring in some nobody. He ends up knocking out your main event dude, killing your cash cow, and that can kill your promotion just as fast. So, was it a good idea for them to cancel the promotion or cancel the event because they lost the headliner? We don't know. Probably because this is such an expensive show to put on. Like it could have probably cost them a lot more if they didn't cancel the show. So,
yeah, and it's interesting that Elite XC show, the Petrozelli and Kimbo show, that's right around here. This is where that's it's very close to this in terms of time. So this was that period where Dana White had his little graveyard of promotions that he had defeated, and I think Affliction and Elite XC, they're very different companies in a lot of ways. Affliction went for the real sort of pride sport aspect, and Elite XC was going for the like crazy Kimbo, Gina Carano, James Thompson weird route. But they both had the same fundamental. Hey, we're like, all right, we're gonna come out guns a-blazing and we're gonna take the UFC on head on. Like they both saw themselves as like, if we just put the money in here, we're gonna create a product that is going to fill a void that's been left now the pride is gone and is going to be a real straight up competitor to the UFC. And they saw that's a lot easier said than done. There's a lot of companies around this time who sort of pick up that mantle. These two were kind of the ones who went under the most spectacularly, but then right around here too is also we're in the dawn of Strike Force around here who did really well for themselves until the UFC just bought them. Same thing with the WEC. They just buy them, and then eventually decide that they're done running them separately and shut them down. So, yeah, it's an interesting time period, and it's very interesting thinking about that nowadays because Bellator is the one that has for all of their faults and all of the place that they get mocked, they're still here, they're still kicking.
And to that note, it's kind of cool to as we do these shows and we look back, we can kind of see how Bellator, Scott Coker has kind of handpicked the good things from these shows and kind of carried them on. And, it's kind of interesting. It's almost as if, there's like this like dark, it's like a dark league kind of, that's just evolving. It's like the anti-UFC. It's just, it's never an official league. It's just always whatever's popular at the time, and it's like made up of all of its predecessors' parts. And it keeps growing and keeps growing. And I mean, it might outlast the UFC with the way the UFC's been running lately. I mean, there's ample money with Viacom, so it's not like that's an issue. And Scott Coker is a guy that, number one, fighters like to work for him. Like people, like he's paying guys. You know what I mean? Look what Rory's making now. So,
right.
I think they're doing good things, and I like seeing all the old school things that are still being brought up, like Jimmy Smith and just different. The whole paying fighters better, and I like what Bellator is doing.
I do too. It's interesting, and and again, I'm impressed that they're still being able to pull it off. you know, as the more that people become interested in looking for an alternative to the UFC for whatever reason, the better that is for Bellator. It'll be interesting to see how they continue to go. This has the potential with, if depending on how the heavyweight tournament goes, if it's a lot of good fights, this has the potential to be a really big year for Bellator, where they could really make a real claim and get some serious fans. If those fights are entertaining. Now, they don't have to be great fight of the years. They just have to be entertaining.
Yeah. So, you know, like we said, Barnett fails a piss test, but he goes on and he strings together 8 wins, runs into Daniel Cormier in Strikeforce, and actually makes his way back to the UFC. Like, many people thought that would never happen, but he's currently on a 3-2 run inside of the UFC. Last fight, he submitted Andre Arlovski. Boom, boom, boom. Yep. In September of 2016. Now, I don't know if he failed a piss test since then. He might have. I don't know. I don't know why he's inactive. I would put my money on that as to why. I don't personally know, but you know, I know he's been doing some coaching, actually, oddly enough, getting his feet right there.
And he's always got his toes in the pro wrestling waters as well. So I think he's been poking around there a little bit lately too.
Yeah, Gilbert Ivell, he beat Pedro Hizzo and then somehow scored 3 UFC fights, lost each of them, but did go on to string together 3 straight TKOs, with the most recent being in November of 2016. So I don't know if he's officially retired, but that's a crazy 3-fight winning streak to finish on if he is. Okay, so before that...
Ivell's an all-time...
He's a what?
He's an all-time crazy man. You gotta appreciate the lunacy of Gilbert Ivell.
Absolutely. Anyway. Go check out his YouTube video where he knocks out a referee. It's brutal. It will make you not like the man. All right. So before that, one of the gnarliest knockouts you will ever see in your entire life, Vitor Belfort defeats Matt Lindland. Epic knockout at 37 seconds of the first round. Holy shit. So Vitor, he comes in from this crazy knockout of Terry Martin in the first Affliction series. Lindland comes in. He had a unanimous decision over Fabio Nascimento in the first Affliction card. And, man, this was, I think, was Lindland favored to win this fight? He might have been the betting favorite going into this. But he had no moments here. Vitor was so much faster than Lindland here. Lindland tries to come in with a punching combo, and Vitor cracks him with this sinister laser left hand that it instantly knocks Lindland to the mat. And Vitor rushes in with some of the most brutal ground and pound I can recall from his entire career, and just absolutely puts Lindland out cold to the point where he starts seizing. Like, he starts seizing so bad and his leg is moving, it looks like he's being tased. Like, this is a scary knockout. And a crazy performance for Vitor, but definitely a scary moment for Matt Lindland here.
Yeah, it's a brutal knockout. It's really nasty. Lindland is in a bad way. It's a short fight, so there's not much really to it other than the knockout. But I think it's a key interesting moment in the history of the evolution of Vitor, because you know, the Terry Martin fight that we covered last time and his fight prior to that, which was over James Dickich, those both established the kind of like new model of Vitor being patient and sort of taking his time and being a more sort of calm, studied kind of fighter. And so that was what we kind of had seen from him in the past 2 fights. And then this is sort of your classic old school, the old Vitor is back kind of performance. So this was interesting to be like, oh, wait, so he can be that patient fighter who won't, you know, push for the KO if it's not there and will wait, or he can still just explode and be old Vitor. And when you put those 2 things together, that is scary. And that was something that he never really, I mean, he's far into his career at this point, but he had always been inconsistent. And I feel like this is a point where you're like, where that inconsistency is kind of going away. And you're like, oh no, this is the reality of who this dude is right now. And it's a scary, scary proposition.
Yeah. Vitor at 185 was a monster, like absolutely scary. And like he seriously hit Lindland so hard. Lindland like legitimately took him like 3 to 4, maybe even 5 minutes just to get back to his feet. Like 2 minutes into being knocked out, Lindland is still trying to take down the officials. You know what I mean? Like he still thinks he's in the fight. Like he was trying to get up under his own power, but just his coordination was absolutely gone. And like they came in and they put a neck brace on him and they tried to get him to leave on a stretcher, but Lindland was like, I'm not leaving on a stretcher. That's not happening. So, you know, Lindland is one of the toughest guys out there. And to see him, you know, in that sort of condition, like this was an Olympian, you know what I mean? To see him in that sort of just vulnerable state, you know, you can't help but just look at Vitor like an absolute savage. You know, he struck a lot of fear into the middleweight division at that point in time.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's interesting, too, thinking about that he like an interesting side note is this is during the time when Vitor is at Extreme Couture trainings. So he's got, I believe at the first Affliction show, Randy was in his corner, right?
Mm-hmm.
Randy is not in his corner here, which, you know, you can understand why. Lindland and Couture obviously have a very long history together. So I don't know if Couture opted out. Oh, Couture also might have not been allowed to be at Affliction or appear on camera at Affliction because of some contractual stuff going on with the UFC. I'm not sure about any of that.
Also, while we're talking about Couture real quick, so between Affliction's first show and the second show, you know, we saw Fedor and Randy go face to face at the first one. Randy actually loses to Brock Lesnar in between the two shows, so that like kind of really killed the whole Fedor versus Randy thing. You know, Brock Lesnar kind of took the reins as the UFC's, you know, baddest man. But yeah, it was kind of sad that it went down like that. But sorry, go ahead.
No, that's all I'm saying. It's had to be a tough moment for Randy to be like, this guy that I've coached has, you know, is doing so well, but he's doing it at the expense of my old, you know, my long time friend. And also Vitor's working with Ray Sefo here, who I feel obliged to mention, one of the all-time great K1 heavyweights. Ray is in Vitor's corner here, and Sefo is obviously you know, one of the best strikers that, you know, has ever been in the sport of K1. He's a legend, and he's done some really good things for Vitor's striking from a technical standpoint as well, and he shows it off here.
Yeah, and Vitor went on to you know, back to the UFC, did some really good things. I think TRT Vitor was one of the most dangerous people in the world of all time. Just like fisticuffs, hand-to-hand combat. TRT Vitor is a scary proposition. Of course, he went on to fight for the UFC middleweight and light heavyweight title, losing, of course, to Anderson Silva and John Jones. Currently ranked number 12 in the UFC. He was supposed to fight this past Saturday against Uriah Hall, but Hall was unable to make the weight. I think he had a seizure or something, so that bout was scrapped. I think they're talking about Vitor Belfort versus Michael Bisping in England. So it'll be like a joint retirement fight, I think, for those two guys in a rematch. Because, as we know, Vitor went on to kick Bisping in the head during this crazy, like, 3 fights where he was just kicking people in the head nonstop, which was absolutely incredible. And I'm such a Vitor fan. I can't even say it enough. Like, what a specimen.
Yeah, it's yeah, and this is one of his real highlights.
But Matt Lindland, this was definitely the end of the line for him. He went on to lose by knockout 3 more times. Maybe they weren't knockouts, but I know he lost spectacularly 3 more times. And he knocked out Kevin Casey. But yeah, that was it for him. No, all right, so before that, we had Babalu Sobral defeated Sokoudjou by submission, Darce choke at 2 minutes and 36 seconds of round number 2. This was in the light heavyweight division. We saw Babalu on the first show, as we saw Sokoudjou. Babalu picked up a decision over Mike Whitehead. Sokoudjou knocked out Lil Nog, which was absolutely bananas. Went on to knock out Ricardo Arona, which was absolute bananas. He you know, Sokoudjou is like I said, he's that guy who never really had a chance to develop, so to speak. And you know, he was just fed to the wolves way too early, and this was kind of one of those matches. Like, he should probably should not have been in here with Babalu Sobral. He went to the UFC. He he did not do very well there. And, and this fight was just, Sokoudjou just really had nothing for the ground game. Like, it was just all Babalu all the time, pretty much.
Yeah, we covered Sokoudjou when we talked about Pride 33, where he had that win over Lil Nog, and yeah, I agree. I mean, he was thrown to the wolves really early in his career, and some people thrive in that, and some people it drowns them, and it drowned him. He's just in over his head here against Babalu, and Babalu's got too many tools in the toolbox and is able to just get it done. So
yeah. Sokoudjou was gassed by the second round, and Babalu did what he had to do. Little note here: in the cage, Tito Ortiz, for whatever reason, is doing the in cage post fight interviews. Horrible, cringy. Like, I'm glad this was the last of that. But he actually called out Babalu. He's like, "Hey, Babalu, good job, but my back's a little injured. But as soon as I'm healthy, let's get it on." It's like, what are you doing, bro? How are you going to interview someone and then say you want to fight him? That seemed a little.
It was a little awkward, and I forgot about the Tito stuff. That put that in the category with the Chuck Zito backstage interviews. It's just weird stuff. This also is the source of the great line where after challenging Babalu, weirdly, he then wraps up the interview and says, "Ladies and gentlemen, Babalu Sobral, one of the best light heavyweights of the night." What are you talking about, dude? one of the best. I'll have you know, there are 2 light heavyweight fights on this card, 4 total light heavyweights. So yes, he is one of the best light heavyweights of the night. Ugh.
Yeah, wait, 1 of 4. That's if you're not first, you're last.
There you go. And he's clearly proven that he's better than at least 1 by just beating that 1. So he's top 3 on the night.
Yeah, Tito was just really bad, really bad at the.
It was terrible.
But it was sad because he was really trying his best. It's not for him. Like, thinking fast and talking fast has never really been Tito's thing. If you need evidence of that, go watch his trash talk build up to his fight with Chael Sonnen. Cringeworthy. Yeah. So enough of that. Before we have Paul Buentello, Mr. No Fans, defeated Kirill Sidelnikov, also known as Baby Fedor, by TKO, doctor stoppage, or corner stoppage, or someone stopped the fight in the 3rd round because, essentially Paul Buentello was jabbing the life out of Baby Fedor, and Baby Fedor had 0 answers for it. Like, he was just it was hard to watch, actually. Like, all I remember is Baby Fedor's head just snapping back and snapping back and snapping back the entire fight. Completely one-sided.
Yeah, Buentello just dominates him. I mean, Sidelnikov gets very little out of this, and it's really interesting. I sort of after that had to went and looked at the records of both men to see kind of where they were at and all that kind of thing. For some reason, I guess, well, not for some reason, because of the connection to Fedor, I always gave Sidelnikov this credit as being like, oh man, that guy's going to be really. He's not. He's going to be great. He at no point does he accomplish anything of any value in MMA. He does not have any wins of note. This is kind of how it goes for him. He gets completely taken apart on the feet, and he has no shot ever at making it any other fight than a standing fight. So it's a very good performance from Buentello, who actually was, looking like a pretty good fighter at this point.
Yeah, he definitely derailed the hype train of Baby Fedor before it even got started.
Yeah.
That's for sure. Baby Fedor was not ready for a former UFC world title challenger. You said Buentello was on point at this stage in his career, which is absolutely true. So much so that when Barnett pops hot and was pulled from the Fedor fight for the 3rd Affliction card, Buentello was campaigning nonstop to be the replacement. He didn't want any more money. He just was like, "Hey, I'll do it. But let's be honest, nobody, as Buentello himself proved when he tried to get the crowd to recite his catchphrase, no one's tuning in for Paul Buentello. Like, sorry, it's just not going to happen.
No, it's not. Although I will say, nobody does tune in for Paul Buentello, but that again, we talked about the Barnett versus Arlovski aborted previous version of this card, and one of the fights on that card was scheduled to be Buentello versus Roy Nelson, which I actually think would have been awesome, and I would have. I regret not seeing that. That sounds like a good fight.
Yeah, man, that sounds like a damn good fight. Is Buentello retired? Do we know? Is he done?
It looks like sure.
His last fight was in 2016. Looks like he got kicked. Might have been a head kick knockout in ACB in Russia.
I mean, he's not retired. He might still kick. He also has a win over Sokoudjou within the past couple of years, which is very strange. I wonder how that came about, but there you have it. I bet he'll. I wouldn't be surprised to see him still pop up every once in a while.
Maybe Scott Coker will book Roy Nelson versus Buentello over there in the Bellator MMA league. I think that would be cool.
Perfectly solid choice. Yeah, he seems like a perfect choice for a heavyweight Grand Prix alternate bout. Get him on in there.
I'm with it. All right, so before that, opening up the pay-per-view main card, we had Dan Lauzon, little brother to UFC veteran Joe Lauzon, defeats Bobby Green in a weird fight. He wins by submission, rear naked choke, 4 minutes, 55 seconds of the longest first round of all time. So Lauzon comes in 12-1, younger brother of brother Joe, like we said. He had a UFC loss to Spencer the King Fisher at this point. But he finished 7 straight opponents heading into this fight. Green, on the other hand, Bobby Green, of course, UFC veteran nowadays, but back then he was only 7-1. It was like 1 day notice for this fight. Like Green looks so young here. Like he's like all baby faced, and it's kind of cool looking back and seeing him so young and just so green, so to speak. Excuse my terrible pun, but the moral of this story was ball shots. This was ball shots galore. I'm sad to say, and unintentional. Like Green came out and he was just going really crazy and trying to just put on this crazy frenetic pace, and he's throwing a lot of volume, but his weapons got away from him, so to speak. And I think he kicked Lauzon in the balls like 3 times, or what was it, like 2 or 3 times, something like that.
I think 3, certainly more than 2, 3 if not 4. It's a lot of low blows, like a serious number of them. Czech Congo's watching this fight, being like, "Dude, you're kicking him in the nuts too much here. Calm it down."
Yeah, it's
really a lot. It ultimately leads to the super rare 2-point deduction from Herb Dean, which I've only seen one other time, an Alex Caceres fight. I can't remember who it was against, but yeah, 2 points deducted for the multiple groin, like at once for the multiple groin shots, and it's a justifiable move.
Now you got me interested in this Alex Caceres 2 points here. Yeah. I don't ever remember seeing 2 points getting deducted.
2 points, some Caceres fight. I can't remember if Caceres was the recipient or the kicker.
He was the kicker. I remember Caceres getting deducted. That sounds familiar.
Jimmy Rivera, maybe? I can't remember. We're going to have to look that up.
We'll have fans out there. You right there. Look it up for us. Put us in the comment section. Add us on Twitter or something. Fill us in. Help us. Help us help you. Right?
There we go.
So
it's weird.
Yeah.
It's hard to like evaluate the fight other than that, because it's so start and stop. There's no like momentum to it. So it's hard to really think about. I was thinking about that. It's good that it ends in the first round. I was thinking how hard it would be to be a judge and have to score that first round for somebody, because like it just feels so disjointed. I can't really even think about it as like a coherent round of action. It's just,
and then on top of that, you have to deduct 2 points from Green. So it's like after you judge the round, you have to do math, and it's just like what? So yeah, definitely cool that it ended. And you know what else? I think this is an excellent precursor to the funky, wonky career that Bobby Green had in the UFC. Like, who has been in more weird fights, right? like just weird, like low blows and like just odd, weird endings. This is the MO of Bobby Green here.
Yep.
But it was a weird kind of way to start the card. Definitely not indicative of what we were in store for, but definitely an intriguing way to start the fight. Dan Lozon, on the other hand, whose nickname was the Upgrade, which I think he selected a little prematurely. He, he went 0-2 in the UFC, 1-1 in the World Series of Fighting. Lost to Justin Gaethje, and lost his last fight by KO in 2015, and that was all she wrote for the Upgrade.
Yep.
All right, so let's roll on to the HDNet prelims, which were commentated by Kenny Rice and Boss Rutan, which I love, by the way. Them two together, that's fun to watch. Like, I just enjoy them playing off each other. It's pretty cool. So we have Lil Nog. He defeats Vladimir Matyushenko with a knee at 4 minutes and 26 seconds of round 2. Nog here, we saw him destroy Edmund DeWeese in Affliction Band. He goes over to Sengoku, wins a fight, comes back for Affliction. Vladimir was he was 21-3. He already had a UFC run under his belt, 8-fight winning streak going into this. His only losses were Tito Ortiz, Vernon Tiger White, and Andrei Arlovski, which was a sweet knockout from Arlovski. But this was actually a rematch from a Japanese regional fight back in 2002 where Matyushenko actually won by a unanimous decision. So, it was kind of cool that this was a rematch. And the first fight was so boring and so lackluster that the second round, the announcer Kenny Rice, he goes, "Hey, a fight broke out in the second round," and I'm just like geeking out to myself, like, "Way to be, Kenny! Like, that's awesome." But the second round was fireworks. I mean, absolute fireworks. Matyushenko like lands this nasty hook that wobbles Nogueira, and Vladimir really puts the pressure on and tries to finish, and Nogueira's bleeding, but Nogueira recovered and slowly took back control of the fight and starts, landing some nice knees from the clinch, lands his left hand. He gets Matyushenko covering up, moving away, runs up, lands another beautiful knee, and puts away Matyushenko. So cool, a cool fight, a fun fight, despite the first round being ass. The second round was all the rage.
Yeah. Yeah, it was good. Terrible first round, great second round. So good stuff there. And there was some it was an interesting fight because there was some real excitement about Matyushenko at this time. He was coming in off of a really good run in the IFL, which is another one to add to that list of demise promotions from this time period. They had just recently shut their doors at the time of this card, I believe. But he had done really well there, and there was excitement to see kind of what the next phase of his career would look like in his sort of grizzled vet role, which he's done, made a good career of the grizzled vet over the, a UFC run and then a short Bellator run. This was another really good performance from Lil Nog, another one to help sort of erase the memory of the Sokoudjou loss and get him, back righted and helping people to sort of remember him and not just his brother.
Yeah, Lil Nog went on to have 10 fights in the UFC. Recently flagged by USADA, which is disappointing. Matyushenko, his last 5 UFC fights were barn burners. Like, for better or worse, like they ended nicely. Yeah. His Matyushenko's last fight was in 2014, so I believe he's done with the game for now. Okay, so before that, LC Davis defeated Bao Kwok by unanimous decision. This was a classic LC Davis grinding fight. Davis seemed to be somewhat of a promising prospect. He was another IFL guy, like you're saying, and it's just super grindy and probably more competitive than it should have been. And that's just kind of LC Davis's thing. And I mean, it was a fight. Not much note here.
Yeah, it's a pretty sort of standard fight. Davis is an interesting guy because he's he's a guy who I feel like sort of always lived in that, exciting, potential prospect realm and never really crossed over. I was actually surprised to look and realize that he never got shot in the UFC, which is actually a bit of a surprise. He's he had a lot of times where he seemed like he was like right on the edge, and then would fall short. In the fight that maybe I feel like there's a number of times in his career that you're like, ooh, I bet if you had won that one, you'd be getting the call from Dana White. But he never did. He's a good fighter. He just sort of never quite got there. My favorite LC Davis moment is he had a great Bellator fight a couple years ago with Hideo Tokoro that was super fun and felt like a sort of throwback to old school Japanese MMA. That's the one that I love. Davis won that one by split decision, but a great, super fun fight. This is just a fight, just a very standard prelim fight.
Very prelimish. Very prelimish.
Yeah.
Now, he actually went on to lose a fight to Georgi Karakanyan in Bellator. And Georgi Karakanyan actually fights Henry Corrales this Saturday night. If you go over to bloodyelbow.com, I just dropped an interview with Henry Corrales. Go check it out. My dude's hungry and out for vengeance. So go look for that. bloodyelbow.com. Moving on. So we have Albert Rios defeated Antonio Duarte in the second decision of the night. It was competitive. It was scrappy. The first round was like this gigantic scramble. It was a solid fight, but it was a fight, just kind of like the LC Davis fight. Just a fight.
Yeah, it's similar to the last one. These are the fights that separate the card from being, nowadays, that separate the UFC night from being a 3-hour night from a 7-hour night. And this is what fills up those 4-hour gaps. And occasionally you get really exciting things in there, and a lot of times you get things that you just don't remember very much about the next day. And I feel like both of these are don't remember very much about them the next day kind of fights. Not bad. It wasn't a bad fight by any means. Both guys were, like you said, scrappy's a good word for it. I thought, Rios in particular had to kind of, deal with some adversity. And so, it was fine. Just not.
It was fine. Definitely fine. So Albert Rios, if I can double dip for just a moment, actually went on to lose to Georgi Karakanyan, who actually fights Henry Corrales this Saturday night. I have an interview that just dropped with Henry Corrales on bloodyelbow.com. Go check that out. It's pretty good.
You're going to tie every single fight that we have left into that interview, and I'm going to be impressed.
Well, there's only one left, and I don't think we're going to get anywhere with it.
Yes.
So we had Brett Cooper defeated Patrick Spate by TKO at 4 minutes and 10 seconds of round number 2. Brett Cooper was, definitely leagues above this dude here. He was 21 at the time. 7-4, had a win over Jason Von Flue, UFC veteran. Also the guy who kind of coined the Von Flue choke, which we all know is an excellent defense for someone trying to guillotine you and they won't let go. And, Spate, on the other hand, was 7-1 and just kind of seemed to be just a guy. And that's what this fight looked like. Just a guy fighting a fighter.
Yeah. I think highlight of this fight is, Cooper's got shows off some nice strikes in this one. Some slightly unorthodox strikes, some cool stuff. And I think highlight is they go talk to Cooper's corner at the start of the second round and say, what do you think? How are things going? He says, figured it out. We got a plan. Knocks him out by the end of this round. And sure enough, knocks him out by the end of this round. So kudos to them for that. It's impressive. One thing that I noticed here in watching these on Fight Pass, and an interesting thing that I have not seen previously on Fight Pass, in the little blurb for this particular fight, it describes Brett Cooper as a Bellator finalist, which I don't think I've seen the word Bellator show up on any UFC things. I was sort of surprised that somehow that snuck its way in there.
You should screenshot that in case they remove it, just so we can.
I know.
Wow, I think it's very interesting. That's probably more interesting than this fight was, even though it was a pretty awesome knockout.
There you go.
It was a good knockout. Cooper actually went on to put up a 7-5 record in Bellator, which was, pretty respectable. And he just won by a knockout in ACB not even a month ago. So he's still chugging away. Spate, on the other hand, he called it quits after this one. He was like, this ain't for me no more. And rightfully so. Okay, so
Cooper's solid. And that's you're right. Yeah. It is a good knockout. And I feel like that's kind of one of the big things for the night. There's some good, gnarly knockouts on this show. There's a lot of dudes who get knocked out in some violent fashion on this show.
Yeah, speaking of, so this was actually a dark bout. So this fight happened after the Fedor fight, just so they were sure that they had the timing down and they didn't run over, so they had to cut off the Fedor fight. They threw the Jay Heron versus Jason High at the end. So, man, Jay Heron defeats Jason High by, oh, man, I want to call this brutality. He wins by brutality at 1 minute and 4 seconds of round 1. Now, so Heron comes out, right, and he lands this hellacious right hand that crumples High right off the bat. And High, he falls unconscious, but the ropes catch him. So he's like suspended in the ropes, and Heron just starts mauling him. I mean, this is savage, absolutely savage. And thank God that the referee was right there to stop him, because he was just teeing off on this unconscious man. What a brutal, brutal knockout. Like, yikes. That was a yikes moment.
It's nasty. On a night of many brutal knockouts. I mean, the Lindland one, sort of stands in its own thing, but partly because he's out for so long. But this one, High looks dead. And I do not mean, I'm not saying that in some sort of like flippant kind of way. Like, he looks like he is like a body in the corner. It's brutal. He's just slumped in the corner in this just ugly, ugly way. It's terrible. And it's really a beautiful shot too that Heron uses to set him up. I love it. He sort of throws something and throws one shot and sees how High responds to it. And it's a beautiful piece of sort of like, MMA work. We're like, oh, you're gonna drop your hand when I do that? Well then, boom, and that's it. It's really it's a really nice piece of getting a read on your opponent and using it to just nuke him.
Which is good for Heron too, because up until this point, my everlasting image of him was when GSP knocked him out with like that left hook. Remember that back in the UFC?
Yeah.
So it was nice to see him come back from that. And man, what a card. Like, that's what a Affliction Day of Reckoning. What a solid card with some spectacular one-punch knockouts. Fedor, Belfort, Cooper, and Heron. Like, please, go watch those. You have time. Like, you can watch all of these in no time flat. And they're all insane and special and unique in their own ways. And like the Fedor knocking out Arlovski will live forever. Like, that is, no one will ever forget that one. The Belfort Lindland knockout, one of the scariest knockouts you'll ever see. I mean, it's right there with that Tank Abbott Matua fight where Matua was like, gadoosh, you know what I mean? It was definitely one of the hardest. Like, I don't think I've ever had such a hard time watching somebody recover from getting knocked out. That's probably the worst for me is Matt Lindland right there. Like, that was hard. And I'm surprised they filmed it,
Yeah, it is rough. It's interesting. I actually just today, in anticipation of UFC 220 this weekend, I watched a bunch of Francis Ngannou fights and was thinking how much the Overeem knockout reminds me of this, both just, completely stiff as a board and just laid out. It's very similar.
Yeah, but cool card. 9 out of the 11 bouts ended inside the distance, which is cool. We had the 2 decisions, but they were early on. So, like, by the time the actual main card rolled around, like, you weren't even bothered that the fights had the audacity to go 15 minutes. You know what I mean? And this was cool. It had a lot of relevant names. It had some of the world's best heavyweights. It had high-paying salaries for the fighters, but ultimately this was the final the final event. The promotion had to fold after Josh Barnett popped hot and they couldn't find a replacement. The event was canceled, the trilogy, and now we are left with just all these what ifs, because man, Affliction, going off of these two cards alone, you know, like I don't know what the books look like. I didn't see the balance sheets or anything, no cheat charts or nothing, but just as a fan, from a fan's perspective, or even as from a journalistic perspective, looking back, like what a well put on event. The first one was phenomenal. The second one suffered in the production side, but I think the fights were even better than the first one.
Yeah.
So it's like the first one had more of a spectacle, but the second one delivered more so on the fights. So together, I mean, you have this, you have the anthology, if you will, that is fun. And, you know, I wouldn't even be against, like, if you're super hardcore, I wouldn't even be against watching these cards back to back. Like they're that good.
Yeah, I agree. I think they're good stuff, and it is a shame that it only has these two cards, because it's interesting to think about what could have come. I think now as we look back, and you know, there's a lot of interesting little things here in these cards. There's a lot of great fighters getting exposure, and I think that's ultimately kind of the legacy of these Affliction shows, is that they did really interesting bridge for a lot of fans, I think, from Pride into the US world. I mean, this is, you know, for, you know, a guy, okay, so take like a guy like Josh Barnett, you know, yeah, he had a UFC run, but it was sort of pre-Ultimate Fighter, so it was in a whole different era. And there's a whole bunch of new fans here who had never seen him, but had heard of him. Same thing with Little Nog, you know, there are fans who had, and Matt Yushchenko, and like a bunch of these guys. Like there are people who like, you're familiar with their existence, Ben Rothwell on the first card, but you maybe haven't really actually seen them. And I feel like that's sort of the legacy of Affliction, is that it brought these guys into the more mainstream American, like UFC fans radar. And obviously no one is greater in that terms than Fedor. That's the biggest legacy of this, is that really in a way, Affliction is welcome to the United States, Fedor Emelianenko.
Yeah,
and
even though he did
these shows are all about
Pride. Fedor did debut in Pride.
Yes, right. That's true. That's true.
This was,
but
man, for only putting on two shows, they really did it right. You know, it makes me miss them. Like they only did two shows. I'm like, man, I wish there was an Affliction card coming up.
True. Yeah.
What are you gonna do though? All in all, I mean, I'm proud of what they did, and I think they left their mark on their sport, and I think I think they had a major and intricate role in solidifying the legacy, solidifying the myth that was Fedor Emelianenko. I think without the Sylvia fight, without the Arlovski fight, we would have always been like, yeah, but what if he would have fought someone in the UFC? You know what I mean? And so this was like, well, we know what would happen. He probably would have taken their lunch. So
yeah, that's
cool card, man. Just a cool card. Yeah. Kudos to them.
It's a great point, because, you know, you think about what would happen if these didn't happen and we went straight from the Pride fights to Fedor against Brett Rogers and then Fedor losing to Verdum. I mean, it would be a totally different ballgame, because these two former UFC champions, you know, these are major marks on his resume. I mean, these are notable in the list of like all-time great Fedor wins, both of these.
Yeah, and they were really pushing for Barnett, and that would have made it 3. And that
would have been huge too. Yep. Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, let's wrap it up on that note. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Fraser, thank you for joining me. Fraser, I know you have a pick for our next show.
So yeah, here we go. What is it going to be that we watch next time? Well, next time we're going to dip a little bit older. We're going to go back a little bit into the history books, and we're going to take a look at a UFC show that has it makes a big moment. It marks a big moment in the history of the UFC. It also marks the debut of a very prominent UFC figure who is still around in the UFC today, though maybe not for all that much longer. I'm talking, of course, of the debut of
Joe Rogan.
Joe Rogan at UFC 12. That's right. Get excited, folks. And some guy named Vitor Belfort also debuts at that time. just for whatever that's worth. So UFC 12, 1 week from today, we'll be talking about it.
That's UFC 12 Judgment Day. And just so you guys know, I found out just now, so I had no idea. So like I'm super stoked. All the old school UFCs were just amazing and hold such a special place in my heart. And so was this still tournament time, or this is after the tournament?
This was the debut of the 2 tournament format. This is there's 2 4-man tournaments. This is the first ever show where they have come up with the concept of this crazy thing called a weight class.
What is this weight class thing you speak of?
It's weird, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, that's it, guys. You can follow Fraser on Twitter at FCoffeen. You can follow me on Twitter at @TheEddieMercado. If you like this show, please hit the like button down below. It's the thumbs up. It helps us out. Subscribe to MMANation.com. That's DOTCOM. Read us both over at BloodyElbow.com. Whitelist us on your ad blockers, please. Keep this content free and regular. Like Fraser said, we will be back next time with UFC 12. Looking forward to that. And yeah, I guess that's it. Fraser, you got anything you want to say or pimp out before we get out of here?
Nah, I got nothing. I'm excited to see you guys next week.
Awesome. Well, a lot of MMA going on this weekend. We got UFC 220 on Saturday and Bellator 192 on the same day. Why? I don't know, but hey, pick one, and I'm sure you won't be disappointed. So until then, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Go be a good person.